Welcome to the Bermuda Angle Thought Leadership Webinar Series, brought to you by the Bermuda Business Development Agency.
We are committed to being an energetic and sustainable resource for Bermuda, both locally and internationally. Our mission is to position Bermuda as the preferred international financial center and to consistently deliver outstanding value to all stakeholders. We will achieve this by facilitating active engagement between the government and the private sector to protect, sustain, and grow Bermuda's economy.
From insurance and risk to asset management to infrastructure, our industries are thriving. The BDA is here to encourage investment and keep powering sustainable, equitable economic growth for Bermuda. We are connected, we're global, and we are a strategic business partner.
Through the BDA's flagship concierge program, we're connecting established and emerging businesses to our curated network of government and industry contacts.
It's all about streamlining processes and partnering to drive success on the island and around the globe.
This webinar series was created in the spirit of enriching Bermuda's business environment and feeding our culture of collaboration. We've gathered talented Bermuda-connected thought leaders who will educate, illuminate, and inspire.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll stay engaged in the world of Bermuda business. Enjoy the presentation.
Good day. Welcome to the Bermuda Business Development Agency's inaugural Bermuda Angle Webinar, The Bermuda Story, Our Unique Advantages. It is our pleasure to introduce Susan Pateras, Deputy Chair of the BDA. Susan joined the BDA board in 2020, bringing more than 2 decades of insurance industry experience across London, New York, and the Bermuda marketplace. Previously, Susan was COO of Liberty Specialty Markets Bermuda and has worked as a Senior Vice President at Integro Bermuda Limited and Willis Bermuda Limited, and was a Vice President for Marsh, New York's Global Broking Healthcare Unit. Susan, I now hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction. I'm honored to be here today and honored to have the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Curtis L. Dickinson, JP, MP, join us for our first episode of the Bermuda Angle Webinar Series. The Honorable Curtis Dickinson was elected to the House of Assembly in June 2018 and became Minister of Finance in November 2018. Prior to Minister of Finance, Mr. Dickinson was employed as Executive Vice President and Head of Private Banking of Butterfield Group. Prior to returning to Bermuda in 2006, Mr. Dickinson worked in the US and the UK as an investment banker. He is a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, where he received a Bachelor's of Business Administration degree with a concentration in finance. We welcome the Honorable Curtis L. Dickinson to the virtual stage.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thanks for having me for this inaugural kickoff webinar for the Bermuda Angle Webinar Series. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, thank you for taking the time. It's been an exciting year. Lots to cover. Should we just jump in?
Sure.
Excellent. So I think we can all agree 2020 was certainly a year unlike I've seen in my lifetime, and I'm pretty sure you've seen in your lifetime. And one we talk about is probably for the history books. From your perspective, what does the situation in Bermuda look like today? And if I may, I believe that some of challenges in life create opportunities. Would you care to share what you see as the top challenges as well as the top opportunities for us in 2021?
Well, thanks for that question. I think I've been on the record a number of times in either my ministerial statements in the House of Assembly or in press conferences where I've said that 2020 and 2021, at least the first half of it, have been a years like no other. And it has been an extraordinary time for not just Bermuda, but for all countries around the world as a result of the pandemic. We have, from the very beginning, taken a strategy focused on keeping people alive and preserving life and looking out for the health and welfare of our people. And so the strategy involved putting in place a very aggressive testing regime, and once vaccines became available, a very aggressive vaccination program. Today, I'm pleased to report that we're almost about 65% of our eligible population have had at least one dose, and 63.3% have had 2 doses and are inoculated or vaccinated. We have certainly had to adapt our strategy on dealing with COVID as time has gone by. We've certainly learned from our experiences. And as we have implemented the testing and the vaccination programs, we now find that we are in a bit of a much more safer space as a jurisdiction. That's really important because Bermuda has 2 legs to our economy. One is the international business sector, which has been extraordinarily resilient over the course of the last 17, 18 months. They have been able to adapt to working remotely and in some ways carried on business as usual. The other pillar, our hospitality sector, has been significantly negatively impacted. We've seen the reduction in air travel to Bermuda. As a result, less tourists. Our hotels have had to close down. We've had a suspension of cruise passengers coming to the island because of the less than safe environment for folks to travel on ships during the early days of the pandemic. That has now started to turn around, where we have a number of cruise ships who are now home porting in Bermuda. And that's largely a result of the work that we did in terms of trying to ensure that Bermuda was a safe place to be. And so the testing and vaccination programs have not only led to us preserving lives, but also make us an ideal place for people who want to come to Bermuda and find a place that is safe to kind of live, work, and vacation. So we certainly have been jolted like everybody else around the world. Our economy has taken a hit, but we have always been a place that has tried to find opportunities out of challenges, and we've adapted because we've had to, and we now, I think, are a bit of a better place for people to come and see and hang out if they want to, and even live and work here should they choose to, because of the fairly safe nature and the fairly high penetration rate of our vaccination program.
Thank you for sharing that. I think you noted that in 2020, the pandemic spread across the entire world. It impacted people everywhere, derailing healthcare systems and global economies. Over the last 16 months, we've sustained certainly our own impact, as you shared, and we've had various peaks and valleys across the crisis. You mentioned the vaccination rates and the statistics there. How overall would you grade Bermuda's COVID-19 response, and where do you feel we are now?
I would grade us, and I'm a bit biased because I am part of the government. I think we would be deserving of an A+ rating on handling the pandemic. And I would say that we've also had to adapt and learn from this crisis. And as we have put in place policies that we believed have worked really well, we continue with them. Were there instances where there is a need for modification or something that's been deployed somewhere else that has worked, we have been quick to adapt those policies here in Bermuda. I think, there is a bit of pent-up frustration, actually not even pent up anymore, it's a bunch of frustration around, I would call it COVID fatigue, or people are just tired of having to deal with this. And I think the best way that we can come to the other side of it is to follow the rules around health guidance, consult your doctor, in as much as you decide to get vaccinated, follow the health measures around social distancing and masking and hand hygiene. And I think that we will be in a better place 6 months from now should we follow the rules. We took a view that the vaccinations, when we started to see a bit of a plateau, that we needed to start taking the regime to people where they were. And that has had a profoundly positive impact on the rate of folks who decided to get themselves vaccinated. The data, the scientific research suggests that those persons who are vaccinated have a better chance of surviving and not even contracting the virus. And so in as much as we can continue to encourage people to practice safe measures and to protect themselves, I think we're a better place. And we've seen, cruise ships have decided, based on our experience here, to home port. They've had challenges in other jurisdictions, and they've decided to bring their passengers here and then cruise from here. And they can be cruises to nowhere or cruises to other islands, and then they revert back here because Bermuda has a reputation of having been a safe place for the virus.
Thank you, Minister. I think those are all certainly very encouraging to hear as a resident and someone who represents not only the BDA, but IB and a global traveler. So I appreciate your comments as well as the work that you and the government has done. I know that you couldn't just operate on protecting us during COVID. There was still business that had to be done. And so I think if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing some of the highlights and high-level updates on various other initiatives that have been taking place, not only to diversify the economy, but continue to support the economy and grow the economy.
Well, in August of last year, we took the step to go out and to the markets to raise capital for the country. We had taken a decision early on in April of last year that if we were going to close the island down, we needed to be positioned to be able to support those persons who would be adversely affected by not being able to work. I'd like to say that it was all great strategy. I think it was a combination of strategy and timing. We were able to access the capital markets to raise $1.3 billion at the lowest rates the Bermuda has ever achieved in history. That afforded us the ability to fund programs that we needed to have in place to support those persons who could not work, but it also allowed us the ability to refinance existing indebtedness at cheaper rates. We then worked on putting in place an economic advisory committee to work with the government to come up with strategies around getting the economy back up and running once we had passed through the worst phase of the pandemic. The Economic Advisory Committee's work resulted in the development and production of an economic recovery plan. That plan has about 31 initiatives in it, for which the government is now focused on implementing over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. From my perspective, my job is partly to kind of manage the fiscal situation, but also I play a role in helping to encourage the development of business in Bermuda. And so part of my job and what I've raised my hand to do with key stakeholders for whom the Ministry of Finance works very closely with is to raise my hand and say, I'm prepared to work with you, to get on a plane, to get on webinars, to get on telephone calls, to do whatever needs to be done to encourage people to come to Bermuda, because the attributes that we had before the pandemic that were things that we thought were good for business here remain the same. And so we've been working on trying to get back to some semblance of normal.
And I know you've been working extremely hard. One of the specific programs I was hoping maybe you could share some updates on and success on is the Economic Investment Certificate, as well as the Work from Bermuda initiative.
Okay, so the Work from Bermuda initiative was something that was launched last August. We had fairly low numbers of COVID cases, and we took that as an opportunity to start to market Bermuda as a safe place. And we started a program which allowed persons to apply to come and live in Bermuda for up to a 1-year period where they could work and live safely. The program was very successful. I think there were approximately 1,000 applications and close to 890 approvals. And there are a number of persons who arrived last August for a 1-year stay who are exploring the opportunity to extend their stays beyond a year. The focus of the program was one of safety, but also to try to encourage some degree of economic activity. Persons who come here rent homes, they buy groceries, they work, they go out to restaurants when restaurants are available, and they try to enjoy themselves. And something that we probably can't pay enough for, they spread the good word about how beautiful Bermuda is and how friendly the people here are. With respect to the Economic Investment Certificate, the Minister of Labor launched that program at some point early this year. It's a program where we're trying to encourage persons to reside in Bermuda. They're required to make a $2.5 million investment across a broader range of kind of options, and that those persons are allowed, after 5 years of having lived here, to apply for a residency certificate. The program, as I'm told, is off to a very, very good start. The numbers are looking very, very good. We're encouraging persons who have means to invest in Bermuda and Bermuda's economy.
Thank you for sharing those updates, certainly encouraging. The BDA has been at the forefront of pushing and developing the climate risk finance program across Bermuda and having that become one of the diversified pillars that we offer. I know that you've been close to that as well. In your opinion, why is Bermuda well placed to become the world's climate risk capital?
Well, I think Bermuda is known as being one of the world's risk capitals, and we have a fairly large number of insurance and reinsurance companies here who operate out of Bermuda. Many of these companies today, especially in the P&C space, provide coverage for catastrophes all over the world. Climate risk is, I think, a natural extension of the product set that these companies have. And inasmuch as this environment is one that is open to innovation, we have a regulator who is, I think, forward-thinking. We have a number of constituent companies who are also seeking to gain a foothold on this space. And the government, in support of industry, but also our own unique place in the world in terms of our own geography, believes that climate risk is really important. And inasmuch as we can kind of support the evolution of the climate risk finance space, we think it's a natural extension of what we already do today.
I would certainly agree with that and support that. As a segue to that, do you have any comments on any of our infrastructure activities with respects to renewable energy, subsea cables, satellite efforts, et cetera?
Well, we have passed legislation fairly recently on subsea cable. Again, our positioning in the world makes us an ideal place. There are a number of cables that come from Latin America and even those coming out of Europe that stop off in Bermuda. And given the increased digitization of the world and then the need for greater bandwidth, greater capacity across these cables, we think that we're an ideal place for people to kind of terminate or end their cables. From a space perspective, last week we saw Richard Branson and some of his colleagues go up into space. We have an orbital spot. We also are fortunate enough to have been an alternate landing spot for the space shuttle. And we think, again, given our location, that we are properly positioned to be someone in a jurisdiction that could certainly help in the growing area of space exploration and space tourism. We are working on some infrastructure projects domestically, but the interesting thing about the whole ESG movement, we have been doing a lot of these things before. The very nature of our water collection is, I think, highly regarded from an environmental perspective. The special legislation that the Minister of Home Affairs is putting in place with respect to the environment and planning, the work that we're doing with respect to kind of solar on roofs of the government building in order to kind of lower our carbon footprint and encourage more clean energy production. I think all of those things were happening before the prevalence of ESG. I just think that the time has arrived for us to kind of start talking more about it.
That's a great point. I think when you live in a sophisticated 22 square mile island, you're forced to certainly live some of those edicts. And I think we're, with the government's support, certainly moving in the right direction with our own ESG. Do you have any thoughts on why you think it's important for Bermuda to achieve net carbon zero emissions as part of that work?
As a parent of 3 children, what we want to do, my wife and I especially, and I'm sure we share this goal with others, is to ensure that the world that we leave to our children is a place where they can live and prosper successfully. And you know, the internet has certainly been very, very helpful in terms of helping to encourage lots of high-speed communication and people being able to interact with each other. It's also been a very good source of information for people, making it much more accessible. The levels of pollution that we are now dealing with as a global community are frightening, and the way that we have to work to deal with this issue and to ensure that we leave a better world for our children is to ensure that we're better safekeepers of what's going on. And so certainly we can do things. I mean, our dump in Pembroke is only about a finite size. And so unless we start to do things to be more mindful of the impact of our actions on our economy, on our local environment, we can see ourselves becoming overwhelmed with the negative impacts of kind of pollution. So I think the timing is right. I think that the things that we've been doing in the past need to be emphasized. I was in Denmark about 4 or 5 years ago visiting with a friend, and Denmark has a mandate that you can only put out a certain size container full of trash. I don't think that we're going to get to that place at any time soon, but I know that the Minister for Home Affairs is working on legislation around single-use plastics. We have seen the extent of plastics and their impacts on the ocean. We are surrounded by water, and we want to be sure that we can protect our own aquatic environment, but also ensure that we can continue to fish and to kind of live off of the water, so to speak. But that can only happen unless we are better stewards of kind of the environment around us.
Thank you for that, Minister. If I could shift gears a bit, and just with your background in certainly global finance and certainly the role that you serve for the country, I personally have had the privilege of working in the reinsurance space for over 20 years and being part of Bermuda's growth here on island, whether it's in reinsurance or the ILS space or trust and family office or our asset management sector, and now with fintech. Could you share why you feel Bermuda ranks top choice and best in class for financial services company to set up offices here?
You know, they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and if you go back to our history as kind of being a fairly remote location out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in order to survive, we had to be innovative. And I think back to 50 years ago, when the introduction of captives in Bermuda, and what we've seen over the last 5 decades has been an evolution that's been largely driven by, I think, innovation and a need to kind of reinvent ourselves and to be nimble and adaptable. We happen to have a number of really, really great attributes as a jurisdiction. We work well together. I often talk about the concept that the government, the regulator, and industry are all within 1 mile radius of each other. And that allows for ease of communication, ease of collaboration, ease of sharing ideas, ease of getting things done. We have a really deep pool of really, really talented people here, whether they be in the insurance industry, in the accounting industry, in the legal industry, in the corporate services space. Those things, I think, lend themselves because people who are successful and who are smart want to be around other people who are successful and who are smart. We have a number of leading companies here, and I think that's largely because people want to be around others like themselves who are successful. We have a regulator who is best in class in the world, who's globally recognized, who works very, very well with their stakeholders. They are pragmatic in their approach, and that has yielded lots of very, very good success for the jurisdiction, but also for the companies that decide to place themselves here. Our regulators are forward-thinking, and they try to be thoughtful about how the financial services industry will evolve. We have been at the forefront of innovation from a regulatory perspective in the financial technology space and fintech. And we're seeing this, I think earlier today, I was with the Premier announcing that a company named Circle, we're going to be locating their global headquarters, their international headquarters here in Bermuda. The other thing is, I think we also have proven ourselves to be willing to be scrutinized by international organizations and authorities. We have a reputation for being highly transparent, very compliant with international standards, and our ratings from a wide array of organizations prove that Bermuda is a good place to do quality business. And so with those things, I think it's almost difficult for companies not to want to be here.
Well said. Couldn't have said it better or summarized it better. And I certainly agree with all your comments. Before we close, are there any opportunities or challenges that we haven't discussed that you would like to chat about or share any thoughts on?
I think one of the things that, so I've been in this job now for almost, I think, 30 months. And there's a constancy to there being a new threat or a new challenge. And so, every day we come to work and we try to figure out how do we maintain our position as a global leader in the financial services space. We certainly accept that we are the envy of other places. We are certainly mindful enough to not, and self-aware enough to not want to rest on our laurels and understand that Bermuda has differentiated itself, and that there are others who are looking at us trying to figure out how to be as successful as we are. And that with that comes praise, and with that also comes great challenge. And we have seen recently things coming out of the OECD with respect to global tax. That, of course, is in a fairly early stage. What the final product of that exercise will be is yet to be determined. We will continue our advocacy with respect to kind of how we think this should be done in a way that actually makes sense without creating any undue harm. We certainly appreciate the concern that is trying to be addressed by the leaders of the G7 and G20 countries, but we also ask that they be mindful of the potential impacts of the policy solutions on countries like Bermuda, who provide great value, sometimes not fully understood, to other parts of the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's certainly a delicate balance, but on the forefront of not only global media, but concerns here at home. And I thank you for your efforts in that regard. So if nothing else, I'd like to thank you for your time today, offer my personal thanks for appearing on our inaugural session of the Bermuda Angle, and just a very insightful conversation. I know you're extraordinarily busy, but I think our listeners certainly will appreciate not only your collective years of insight, your background, and your expertise on the topics and how you've led our country forward. So on behalf of the jurisdiction and the BDA, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Susan. I really enjoyed today's conversation. As always, I also enjoy working with the BDA on promoting Bermuda and having the opportunity to share with people why they should come here. I think it's a great place. I came back here after an extended stay, kind of studying and working overseas, because I thought this is a great place to raise a family, a great place to do great work. And I'm looking forward to continuing my efforts in support of the BDA and your stakeholders.
Thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed this candid update. We hope to see you in September for the next installment of our Bermuda Angle Webinar Series. And until then, if you need any additional information, please visit our website at www.bda.bm.